Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Belinda Hopkins, who is very well known in the circles of restorative justice, particularly because of her interest in education and the application of restorative principles in that sort of area. So, Belinda, thank you very much for having us here today. And could you tell us a bit about your background? What is it that you used to do, and how you got into restorative justice?
Sure. We're talking about 20 years ago now, when I was a teacher myself in secondary school, French and Spanish, as we were talking about before. And like most teachers that I've spoken to over the time I've been working, I had no preparation for the more challenging aspects of life in the classroom. In other words, no preparation with conflict resolution, no preparation in how to build relationships and connections in the classroom, either myself with the students, apart from obviously personal skills, but also how to deal with challenges and difficulties either between myself and a student or between students. And this became increasingly frustrating for me, because I'd gone into teaching with some very high ideals around the importance of hearing every student, of being in a democratic classroom where children's voices were heard. I'd come from a background in teaching English as a foreign language, where there's a much more equal and respectful relationship between the students in the classroom and the teacher. And I'd read quite a lot of work, Paulo Freire and writers who were questioning what the role of school was and the role of the teacher. So I'd come in with these high ideals. And I was finding myself more and more forced back into the more traditional ways of responding.
So more defensive.
More defensive, and then also, on the attack and using the available sanction systems in school. And I was creating an inner conflict in me, to be honest. I was thinking like I was wanting to go in that way in my work with youngsters, and I was being dragged off course. So I actually went on some training with an organisation called LEAP Confronting Conflict, which is one that you may have heard of. I have to say the training was phenomenal, and it was like a road to Damascus experience. I had this, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. It gave me skills in conflict resolution and in mediation and in facilitating circles with groups. I learned a lot about myself and my own, where I'd got my own ideas around anger from, and how I dealt with anger when I was angry. It really changed my life. And I came back to the school keen to share. I'd part-funded the training myself, actually, but the school had paid a bit. And anyway, I started to use the skills. I started to use my mediation skills. I started to run circles in classrooms, and I had an opportunity to run circles with tutor groups across a particular year group, and the results were fantastic. The relationships between the students improved, their behaviour with each other improved, and I thought, you know what, I think I found my way in the world. And I was just under 40 at the time, and it was like, now I know why I'm on the planet. Honestly, it was that sort of sense of, this is why I'm here. And so, with the support of my husband, because I left that role behind, I left that salary behind.
A bit of the security.
Absolutely, but he was absolutely behind me, and I don't think I would have been able to do it without his support. I kind of went to bed one night as a teacher, and I woke up the next morning as a freelance consultant in conflict resolution. And my very first client was the school I just left. So they gave me the support and the encouragement and the affirmation by inviting me back in to work with some of their tutors and sharing the skills I learned. Anyway, it picked up, and it was around that time, because I had other colleagues who knew about what I was doing, particularly Marion Liebman, who was at that point involved in Mediation UK, and then what became the Restorative Justice Consortium. And with hers and other help, I began to get phone calls from the Thames Valley Police, who were beginning to explore restorative justice and who were beginning to explore its potential in schools.
So that must have been around 1995 or something like that.
That's right. As I say, it was about 20 years ago. And I happened to be in the right place at the right time when all this exciting development was happening. And I got caught up all of that. That's how I know some of the people we've been mentioning, who were ex-Thames Valley Police people. Really,
for example, Charles Bonner.
Charles was very, and still is, very, very enthusiastic about restorative approaches, as I began to call it, in schools. And in those early years, we had the Winchester conferences, and we were this real sense of being pioneers, taking this practice into all sorts of different places.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how I started to get involved and started to write. I began to see, yes, I believe in conflict resolution skills. Yes, I believe in mediation between people in conflict. Yes, I believe in the power of circles in the classroom, and had been a teacher who used them as a way of teaching. Being a language teacher, it's about communication.
Yeah.
So that was the brief. How do you help youngsters communicate, albeit in a different language? So I was very, very creative as a teacher in using those things. It all started to make sense. But the restorative justice rhetoric challenged the thing that I called the bastion of power, that fortress in the middle of a school, which is the sort of power and control ideas that are implicit in the old traditional rewards and sanctions approach. Mm-hmm. Extrinsic motivation, rather than developing that strong inner moral compass.
So in a way, more coercion than persuasion.
I go back to what I just said, that inner moral compass. It's about, what I believe we are about as educators is helping youngsters to learn how it is to be in the world in a respectful, kind, caring, compassionate way. There's a writer called Nell Noddings from the States who believes that our prime purpose in education is to develop an ethic of care and bringing young people up to care. Mm-hmm. And it can be done, and indeed it needs to be done alongside the curriculum, because, as we were saying in our informal conversation, good teaching depends on encouraging youngsters to interact with each other in pairs, in small groups, to discuss, to share ideas, to disagree, to negotiate. All the educational research now is saying that is how youngsters learn, in a safe, supportive environment. Where they feel safe from each other as well as from
authority, if
you like. So, yes, and so we need to give those youngsters those skills alongside the planning we might have for our history lesson or our maths lesson, pro-social skills. So I just got very, very excited about it all, and I wrote. I actually started in the early 2000s. I began my PhD in the implementation of restorative approaches into schools, and my PhD was almost like almost autobiographical as well, because it went from evaluating a case study that began near here, the very first secondary school to have training, and in those days it was the sharp end conferencing training, but my research showed that what teachers wanted was consistent skills that were consistent with those big, high-end, important conferences we still need in school for the more serious things, but they wanted informal skills, the day-to-day classroom management, what to do in playgrounds and corridors when things went wrong. So I began to develop training around that, actually commissioned by the police, the Thames Valley Police, by Tony Walker, who encouraged me to adapt the training that the police were using for conferencing to the needs of teachers. And I began to draw on everything I had learned from up to that point: conflict resolution, mediation, circles, and it was the beginning of the course that I run now, for which we've recently been awarded the Restorative Justice Council.
Yes, you have.
Which I'm really thrilled about. But that was the beginning. It's evolved since then a lot, but that was the beginning, and so it was thanks to the Thames Valley Police and Tony Walker's encouragement that first was developed. And at that point, actually, it might have been taken up by them, but there were some historical differences of opinion, actually, which is still current in our field, about the difference between, I use the word mediation really comfortably alongside restorative facilitation, because I think the overarching or underpinning philosophy is restorative justice.
Yes.
But within that, it's either under the same umbrella or in the same basket, depending on the metaphor you use. We have face-to-face conflict resolution. We have mediation between people who are in conflict, both blaming each other. We have, if you like, the victim-offender situations where one person has caused harm to another with for no apparent reason and no apparent cause from the other person's side. We have all of those things, and they're all restorative. And I really do believe that. But in those early days, that wasn't necessarily the view of everybody. And so my course at that stage was one that wasn't taken up by the commissioners. So I kept it to myself.
Well, in a way, sorry to interrupt, I think that the problem with naming is that we're trying to adapt a discipline that touches on numerous areas to the structures that we already have there in place. So you have the police and the judicial system dealing with one aspect of it, then you have social services dealing with another aspect, and we're trying to get this discipline or this new practice and try to allocate it to those.
But I think it can be, and I mean, we've been now working, although you introduced me as somebody who's predominantly working in schools, in certain parts of the country, me and my team, because from those early stages I then developed an associate team who are fantastic, and some of them, Caroline Newton I mentioned because she's the kind of my right hand woman in this, has been doing training with youth offending teams, as I have, staff working with troubled families, there's the Families First teams, staff working in neighbourhood work, who else? Housing officers, residential care. We've been applying it really widely, and most recently I've heard from some police officers that they believe the sort of the central concepts on which I base my work, so five core beliefs around listening to everybody's voice, around being willing to lower the waterline and share thoughts and feelings. You'll recognise this from standard practice. I haven't invented these. The importance of being aware of the impact of our actions on others, the importance of looking at our human needs as the basis for finding ways forward, influenced by nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, and then the importance of the ownership of problem solving, being with the people who are affected. Those five core beliefs. Recently, a very senior police officer said to me, they need to be the core beliefs for modern policing. And so I believe that the generic ideas that I think all of us across the field share are pertinent and applicable across multi-agency and into the world of business, actually. I mean, the private sector also needs these things. So we've got masses to offer as restorative practitioners.
Well, I think in a way, I always go back to this example because of my background. Accountants, you have tax accountants, stock accountants, and you have other types of accountants. It is accounting at the end of the day, but I think that there's a drive, or there's people try to find niches because that's what they interest them most, or because they feel that they're better at that particular area, they have more knowledge in that area. So yes, we're still talking the same stuff. But I think that there's always going to be this drive to fragment the market, if you like. And I know that we're talking about business in a business sort of setting here, but it is trying to fragment, to divide the cake, so that you know which one is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I get over the last 20 years, I suppose, my reputation and the reputation of my company, Transform Organisation, I prefer to call it, but Transforming Conflict, has been built predominantly on the work we've done in schools, and all the books I've written, up until my most recent one, all the books I've been writing.
So, restorative theory and practice.
Yes, we'll come to that now in a moment. Yeah. But up until now, all of the books I've written have been about developing these ideas, either in youth settings, so in schools or in residential care. But actually, there have been some people who've been reading those books in a more generic way and can see that if you change the wording, it can apply anywhere. And I'm trying now to adapt these books into small booklets with different titles for these different settings we're working in. But yes, I suppose the niche I've carved out is predominantly education. That's my background and where I feel most comfortable. But the recent book, I want to talk about that briefly, was actually my fascination for what is actually happening in a restorative intervention, wherever that's happening, in whatever sphere that's happening. And some people were a bit surprised at this more of a micro-skill focus in this particular book. But it was innovative for three reasons. One was that it was a focus on process, as opposed to my general interest in culture. All my books have been about changing the culture of an organisation, whether it's a school or a care home, or an office or a team. That's my central purpose, really. I mean, it's changing the culture of the world, really, but we need to start
one step at a time.
But this book was innovative because it was focusing on a process, the restorative process, whether it's two people or more. Secondly, because I was no longer the writer, I was the editor, which was a fantastic role, working with 10 really great contributors who I chose because they each have a particular lens, sort of psychological theory or sociological theory, lens through which they understand what's going on. They're still practitioners. I didn't specify the process because some of them used scripted model, some of them used more of a framework model. I didn't specify that, but they were able to explain what they thought was going on. So we have contributors from the transaction analysis. Marg Thorsborn was a fantastic chapter also on her theories, combining affect theory and Nathan's compass of shame, and blending all that in a fabulous way. Mm-hmm. Pete Wallace in Oxfordshire, who's actually developing a theory which he calls resonant empathy, which is expounded at great length in his own book. Just after he'd completed that book, I said, "Now then, Pete, could you please reduce this into a single chapter?" Which he did magnificently. We've got somebody who comes from a Jungian perspective. I won't name them all, but they've all done non-violent communication. Some fantastic people. And some of these have never been in print before, so that was exciting. But the third innovative thing, which I'm very excited about, as a restorative practitioner, I'm hardwired to do all my work in a circle. And we're in a little circle here with you and me and the audience. Here we are, sitting in a circle. Yes. Okay, hello. And so the book starts with a check-in. Everybody introduces themselves in a go-round. Okay, mm-hmm. And then the second go-round was everybody writing a chapter about their theory and how it can explain what's going on in a restorative meeting. And then we had our main focus, because I base my circles on the English tradition of circle time. So we have our check-in, our focus of go-rounds. We could have had a game to mix us all up, but we didn't do that because we were in our own houses. We then had a main focus. They all worked on 2 case studies and gave a sort of explanation of what they thought would be going on in these case studies. And then I gave everybody each other's chapters to read. And so we then did a checkout, a final closing, where everybody shared what they had learned from the process of being involved in the book and working with each other. So it's designed on a circle, and I don't know any other book that's designed in a circle. So it's a really restorative book with a restorative design.
Well, I'm hearing you say this, and the image that I have in mind is cross-pollination. Like you can have these different contributors reading each other's ideas and then getting new ideas Absolutely. Out of that as well, combining that knowledge from other people with their own, and Absolutely. Then coming with something else. I hadn't thought about that before, and Absolutely. Then you go in and explore more into that.
Absolutely, and that for me is restorative practice. That's for restorative practice. I also have, before I was, or during my teaching career, I was also a storyteller, and I love the phrase restoring justice. We're bringing the stories back. We're giving the opportunity for everyone affected by a particular situation to share their story. And then we are co-creating a new story together for the future. We're weaving our own experiences into and our thoughts, our feelings and our needs into where we're going to go for the future. Mm-hmm. So we are restoring. So
actually, it's almost like you're living that experience without actually living it. You participate in a story that is not your own. You have those feelings as you read or as you go through this story.
Absolutely.
It's like learning.
Well, exactly, and that's why I'm a great advocate of using circle in classrooms, because when you use circle in classrooms, and I'm not talking about problem-solving circles, I'm just using, I have this verb, to circle. You are giving everybody a voice. So, for example, a check-in where every youngster starts maybe by introducing themselves. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but in so many schools these days, children are coming and going, and new students are arriving. They don't necessarily know everybody else. They may come from a different background. Their name may be a little difficult to understand. So always do lots of this. My name is, and one thing I remember from last lesson, or my name is, and one thing I remember that I learnt from my homework last night. And everybody shares that little bit of knowledge, a memory, or a new bit of learning, and they are being each other's teachers. And so what you're saying by doing this is, as a teacher, I am valuing all of your voices, and I am seeing you as each other's teachers. So it's not just me the authority in so we're talking about two words authority here. I'm just not the authority, the point of reference for this topic. You also have that responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to allow you to share that. And it's proven to be a very effective pedagogical technique. And then at the end of the lesson, and then during the lesson, you might stop the lesson and say, okay, we've just done something exciting together. What have you all learned from that? And isn't that interesting? That and you may come up with something that I think, oh, I hadn't thought of that, Miguel. And I might say something and you go, I hadn't thought of that, Belinda. And together, two bits of knowledge become two separate bits of knowledge become knowledge that we both share together. So that's exciting. So it's you. I now coined the phrase restorative pedagogy. I'm just going to use this wonderful adjective because I believe in restorative principles so much that I think it can be applied to pedagogy, to the way you actually teach.
I'm not going to try to to repeat that name because I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong anyway. What is it that you're doing at the moment? You have just published that book. By the way, that book is our November's prize draw in the Restorative Forum. So thank you very much because you provided those.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
3 dedicated copies. So you'll be saying
for this
and such and such person.
I will sign something. Yeah.
And you go. But what is it that you do at the moment? What's the focus of your work at the moment? Having just completed that.
Yes. Well, writing wise, I've loved the role of editor. I've loved the role in supporting people, as I say, some of whom have never been in print before. And there are various topics that I'm interested in out there in the world, which may lend itself to an edited book. Mark Thorsborn, whose books I admire tremendously, has, with Nick Burnett, a co-author, written a fabulous book about using restorative approaches with youngsters with special needs, and I think it's an important topic. And I know quite a lot of really gifted teachers around the country who are doing that, and I think more could be said about that. So I'm wondering about an edited book where I invite practitioners who are adapting restorative practice with youngsters with speech and language difficulties, with ADHD, with autism. As I say, Mark's book's great on that. Mark and Nick's book is great, but I think more could be said. So that's an idea I've got, and I'm beginning to identify people working as SENCOs, special educational needs coordinators in schools, people working in special schools, to maybe contribute to the chapter, because I think we learn, as I say, from sharing our stories. That's one idea. I'm being asked whether I want to do a fresh edition of Just Schools, because when I wrote Just Schools in 2004, it was a dream, it was an aspiration. What would it look like if, because there's a jigsaw puzzle on the front of that book, what would it look like if all these pieces of the jigsaw were in place? There was no single school who had them, but now that there are schools who have many of these jigsaw pieces. So wouldn't it be wonderful to go back and make a follow-up, maybe a new edition, but with the stories of the schools who now have got those pieces in place.
I think it would be very interesting to see what has been learned and achieved in this period.
So it might be a new edition, or it might be a new book. I'm not sure. So there's that, and then there's something else I won't say too much about. I'll just allude. I'm meeting on a regular basis at the moment with a really exciting group of professionals, and we're all passionate about what it means. What might a restorative organisation look like? Institution, organisations, what would it look like? And I know that the Restorative Justice Council has got its new RSQM, Restorative Services Quality Mark, but I'm not sure it goes far enough. And I think there is more to being a restorative organisation than is covered in that quality mark. It's a good start. It's a good start. And those of us who are meeting, we meet here and we have lunch, and we talk and we talk and we get very excited. And we've recently thought, maybe we could write a book about this. And I just love, I love those kind of collaborations with people. So I've got lots of things there. And not that writing books earns much money, so that's kind of like a sideline. I'm involved in a lot of different projects at the moment.
One of those that you mentioned before was your idea that you'd like to have people with the shared interest in using RJ in education in different ways Across Europe, you said.
Yes, okay. So Europe, working in Europe is working with and in Europe is very exciting for me at the moment. I'm an ex-French and Spanish teacher. I've recently come back from the south of France, having run a course for an organisation, a new organisation down there, who's very excited to spread the ideas. And interestingly, the French Ministry of Education have actually published some guidelines, actually a pamphlet promoting restorative practice in schools that has gone out to every school in France. So you'd think that at the moment there'd be masses of interest, but it's not known by very many people. Mm-hmm. And there are only, I can count on the fingers of one hand the people who are currently able to train that in France. And that's important for the French to grow themselves. But as somebody with 20 years experience and able to speak French, if I can help, that's fantastic. So that's one project. But for many years now, there's been many of us from different countries have been going to the European Forum for Restorative Justice, which is a great organisation, but whose main focus up till recently has been the reform of criminal justice, whereas those attending from the education side are working towards the reform of educational institutions, particularly along restorative lines. So we've been gathering and have formed what we call the European Circle for Restorative Educators. Now, it's not huge, and at the moment we have a website, which is the European Circle for Restorative Educators.com, I think. Mm-hmm. I've just bought the domain, and a friend has helped me to establish it in a very rudimentary way. It needs, my vision is that we have a representative from every country in Europe who is able to either upload, or through me or through an administrator, upload information about what's going on in their country, in their page, in their language. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, I say their language. We are now in a very, very multi-ethnic, multicultural situation. So actually, it's not just Norwegians in Norway. We may need to also think about the languages of the many different ethnic groups in Europe. Mm-hmm. However, the idea is it's not just Anglocentric, because although that can be a language that many people can relate to, I don't want it to be exclusionary. So the idea is that each country will have a page in its main language, mm-hmm. But that people can share their training opportunities, conferencing opportunities, but also, can anybody help? I'm about to go and visit my Ministry of Education. What document can I use to help make my case? We did this, we tried that, so that we can actually support each other.
So sort of creating a community where you can share best practice and experiences and tips and support each other.
Yes, and lobbying, because I think I have occasionally, I remember I recently was in Belgium and did a wonderful workshop with the Flemish Office for the Commission for Children's Rights, who are advocating for restorative practice in Belgium, in Flemish schools, and that was great. And years ago, I went, also in Belgium, I went and spoke to the Flemish Ministry of Education. Now, that's great, but I can help people do that. It'd be better if it was people,
from within the country,
who are doing that now, by the way, who are doing that now. But we can all help each other, and that's what I would like to do. So that's also, but it's I'm not doing that for earning money. So I continue. The other thing I continue to do is offer training in this country and abroad, and that helps to keep some income coming in to keep us afloat. Mm-hmm. As is Caroline and others doing fabulous work with teams, with different teams around the country. So that's our income stream. That's our income stream, because I'm not someone who's gone for grants or tenders or funding. I've never done that. We're a social business. Our income is what we've earned, mm-hmm. and it continues to keep us afloat. So, mm-hmm.
You were saying before that the dramatic situation that we have at the moment is there's more than ever before there's need for restorative approaches in schools, in different environments as well, in justice and all those settings. And at the same time, funding is evaporating, so we have a much smaller cake in terms of funding when there is more need for these services. And also you have more people, more practitioners, more people who are there and can offer things. But, there just isn't the demand because the government or the institutions are not allowing that demand to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult situation. I try to work with everybody, I don't come into this field with like a business hat on. I've had to learn some entrepreneurial skills simply to spread the word and to keep us afloat, obviously. But I don't like the kind of I don't really think of everybody else who's offering this training as my competitors. I feel they're my colleagues. Occasionally, that I've had some situations where that notion of competition has sort of hit me in the face a little bit and found that quite upsetting. I think we were talking earlier about the concept of market. I like to think of it as need. The need out there for what we offer as restorative practitioners is more and more. We're needed more and more. I think we do have to become canny, I suppose, about how we help people know about us. In terms of funding, schools have their own funding. It's not. I know probably less as well, but schools seem to me to be very willing to spend some of their budget on this kind of work because it helps with all sorts of things that are really important to them. I mean, obviously, that teaching and learning is very important, but we've now got evidence that shows that a more restorative culture in school actually does help youngsters to learn more. I used the word pedagogy. No, you didn't like that, but we've got Monmouth.
I didn't say I didn't like it, so that I wouldn't try to pronounce it.
Monmouth Comprehensive School. If people go on my website, transformingconflict.org, on the front page, on the home page, got some statistics from Monmouth Comprehensive School, which is showing that not only are things like exclusions down and attendance up, very importantly, stress-related illness amongst staff is way down because they now feel far more competent and confident to deal with things in a way that sits well with their heart values, but is effective in getting people back to the teaching and learning. But also attainment. Their exam results for the past couple of years is better than they ever have been, and they would attribute in large part that to their restorative ethos. Partly because the students are happier in the classrooms and get on with learning, partly because the teaching and learning actually integrates restorative principles. They're interestingly, using some of the questions that we know in restorative practice into lessons to help youngsters ground their learning. What am I thinking when I read that? How am I feeling? Bringing in the affective domain into learning, which it's there. But also because they're using staff circles, so it's classroom circles of support for the students, but staff circles of support for staff. So staff, their own thoughts, feelings and needs are being listened to, so they're willing to go that extra mile to support those students who need that extra help. So the combination of that is actually impacting on achievement. So any school that is building into its development plan, focus on improved relationships, improved behaviour, reducing bullying, raised attendance, raised achievement, could well do with looking at restorative approaches. They've got a budget for training. They've got a budget for training, so there's loads of scope there. I can't understand why a school wouldn't want to look at that.
Actually, well, that's extremely interesting. I think we're going to be leaving it there now. So I got to train. I'll put a link to your website on YouTube and on the forum as well. If you're interested in all this that we were discussing, you're going to find it there. And hopefully you'll get people in touch with you who are interested in using restorative approaches in schools.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Belinda. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming all the way out to our
and
rural
thank you for
bliss
me
here.
Homemade cookies.
That's okay. You had to take one on the train back.
I will do. So thank you.
You're welcome.